attention. Hello, I'm Beth Dacey. I'm the second vice president of the American Club here in Sweden. And I'm so encouraged to see so many of you. Gosh, we had a pandemic, didn't we? I think this is our first event that wasn't just strictly social. We're so excited to see you and welcome you to our town hall today with our new ambassador. We'd like to thank you for joining us and making this a possible event. It's a tradition, a nice tradition of the American spirit of the town hall. We're so pleased that you could be here. Thank you, ambassador. We'll be turning it over shortly to you. And after the ambassador delivers his comments, we will be hosting a Q&A that David will be our master of ceremonies, our moderator for that. Some of you have submitted questions and they have been submitted to the ambassador, so many of those will be addressed. And after the fact, there will be some opportunities for talking as well. And then after our event, we're going to open up to a more social event with invite you to a glass. Yes, you're a yes. Do some prosecco and some light snacks. I'm going to now turn you over to our president, Jerry Bartlett.
Thank you. I just want to take a few minutes to talk a little bit about the history of the club and the strong relations that we've had with the U.S. Embassy over the years. As many of you know, the club's birthday was yesterday and falls coincidentally on the same day as the signing of the Treaty of Amity and Commerce between Sweden and the United States in 1783. The treaty officially established commercial relations between our two countries. Both the treaty and the establishment of our club were done for reasons of furthering the relations between these two great countries. The club today traces its roots back to two clubs from the early 1900s. The Swedish American Society was a club that was founded in 1905, consisting mainly of Swedes, and they were created to further the social bonds between Sweden and Swedish Americans, as well as the sharing of information about the conditions in the old and the new country. At that time, there were many Swedes that were coming back from the United States and immigrating back to Sweden. The other club was the American Club of Stockholm, which was formed in 1919, and it was formed under the original name of the New York Club. That club was formed to further the spirit of American hospitality and helpfulness in Sweden. These two clubs merged together in 1980 to form the American Club of Sweden. And I'm proud to say that to this day, we still share the original purposes of those two clubs. The purposes of furthering the bonds between Sweden and America, and of doing that through the spirit of American hospitality and helpfulness. Throughout the years, both of the original clubs also held strong bonds with the U.S. Embassy. These clubs held various social gatherings together with the embassy. They hosted special guests such as President Theodore Roosevelt, Generals George S. Patton and Dwight D. Eisenhower, and Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson, to name a few. Since the American Club of Sweden's formation in 1980, the U.S. Ambassador to Sweden has traditionally held the post of Honorary President of the American Club of Sweden. Today, the club is home for all those who believe in and want to strengthen deep social, cultural, and diplomatic ties between Sweden and the United States. This brings me to tonight. I feel extremely honored to welcome Ambassador Ramanathan here for a town hall with our members. Ambassador Ramanathan is continuing the tradition mentioned before of accepting the role of honorary president of our club. And he did this back in March. So before turning over the floor to you, I would like to formally bestow upon you the title of honorary president of the American Club of Sweden. And Beth is going to present you with a club pin as a token of our appreciation.
Wow, that's beautiful. I have another lapel.
Let's make sure I don't actually
Always
jab
refer
you.
to the lapel pins.
Crazy to come in and take me down if I stab you with it. That's a joke.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. It means a lot to us. And I'm really looking forward to working with you in the future. to further strengthen the relationship between our two countries. And with that, I'll turn the floor over to you.
Great. Well, good evening, everyone. And hey. I'm so happy to be here. It's great to be here with you tonight. I want to say thanks to Jerry for that wonderful introduction and to Beth. Thank you to all of your members. And I'm touched and to have the recognition of being honorary president of this storied American Club of Sweden. So it's really a thrill and an honor, and wonderful traditions that you described that brought this organization together and carrying it on to the next decade. So I'm very glad to be part of it. I first came to Sweden 32 years ago, I think it was, as a college student and a backpacker. In fact, I just saw the youth hostel, the floating youth hostel off Shopman back in the harbor on the drive over tonight. So I was really excited about that. Some good memories of very late nights in midsummer back then. But it's really obviously hard for me to fathom as someone who's took that journey that so many people do take to come see what's going on here in Sweden, and to fathom that I would come back 3+ decades later as U.S. ambassador. So it's really again an honor and a privilege and an amazing voyage. Of course, my focus now is not on cheap hostels and how to afford the next beer, but I work on defense and security, and I get to work on trade and investment and the existential crises and challenges of our day that U.S. and Sweden both have such large voices on, like combating climate change, looking out for not only putting an end to the pandemic threat we've all lived through of late, but public health challenges that are coming down possibly after that, shoring up democracy, bolstering human rights, defending human rights, speaking up for them, and of course expanding people-to-people ties, which is a lot of the work that you do and that we do every day. So I really look forward to building on our already robust ties in all of these areas to the benefit of the people of both countries. Of course, I know you all know in this organization, as all others, that America and Sweden have a relationship that goes back 400 years, nearly 400 years, to 1638, I believe it was, the colony of New Sweden in Delaware, present-day Delaware, and more than 4 million Americans trace their heritage to Swedish ancestry. So that's an impressive segment of our population, and it just has led to such deep ties between the people of the United States and Sweden. And Sweden was the first non-combatant country after the Revolutionary War in 1783, I believe it was, to recognize the United States as an independent country. Jerry mentioned the Treaty of Amity, Amity Commerce in Paris, and I think that was actually our first envoy, Benjamin Franklin, who ran point on that treaty. And I'm incredibly privileged to be kind of in, a descendant of a descendant of a descendant of his. So our history and close ties together, really, I think, results from everything I've seen since I've been here, in just unprecedented friendship. And that's friendship that I can see all around this room, and I'm looking forward to getting to know many of you, both Swedish and American. And it's maybe because our two countries share so many values, whether that's freedom of speech, freedom of religion, commitment to advancing gender equality and all kinds of equality, of diversity and inclusion, and a strong commitment to helping people in need. The humanitarian impulse is so deep in both places, and maybe that's why so many Americans choose to make their lives here in Sweden, like many of you. And one of the preeminent goals of any U.S. embassy, ours included, is to support and advance the interests of U.S. Citizens who are overseas. At the beginning of the global pandemic, Department of State repatriated more than 100,000 citizens on more than 1,100 flights from 136 countries and territories around the globe. And that's just one example of the kind of mobilization we've done before to help keep people safe and to help support them. Today, we, like the rest of the world, are focused on Putin's unprovoked, unjustified, and utterly brutal attack on Ukraine. And I know you're all following the news, I'm sure, like all of us, coming out. U.S. assistance to Ukraine has been and will continue to flow across all sectors. That's security assistance, defensive arms, economic aid, governance assistance, and humanitarian aid. The U.S. has provided about $2 billion in security assistance to Ukraine since the start of the Biden administration, so just in the past 14 months. And Sweden, of course, has taken the very historic step of also providing military assistance, defensive arms to Ukraine twice now, something that Sweden has not done for a country in conflict since the Soviet invasion of Finland in 1939. So an enormous event, that really shows the seriousness of the situation and how it's recognized that desire to help in this tragic situation, and the resolve that both countries share in facing down Putin's aggression. Among the actions that we're currently taking in support of U.S. citizens and their families who have been affected by Russia's invasion are maintaining a 24-hour welcome center for U.S. citizens in Poland near the Ukrainian border, where we can aid in facilitating their onward travel. Many are women and children, older gentlemen. Deploying consular support teams near the Ukrainian border in Romania, in Hungary, Slovakia, Moldova, the neighboring states where so many refugees are flowing. Over a quarter of the Ukrainian population has been displaced, and not all have left Ukraine, but displaced at least internally. And establishing direct communication between the State Department in DC and U.S. citizens who are still in Ukraine, another important role. We've expanded the authority of the consular sections around Europe and to locally accept and process emergency immigrant visa applications for U.S. citizens with non-citizen family members. So, for example, spouses. And I have tremendous respect for our consular colleagues across Europe who are diligently working to support our citizens and their families through this horrific and unprecedented security situation that strikes right at the heart of Europe, likes of which we have not seen since World War II. So I also want to take this opportunity to, again, to go beyond the security situation and just thank you all present today for committing to promoting U.S.-Swedish cooperation, because that cooperation is important on all of these levels. I thank you for your support to the U.S. Embassy, to my many predecessors all the way back to Franklin. I think the present situation really shows the value of that commitment, of unity and solidarity of purpose. What happens when we work together with our allies and partners to secure a more peaceful and free world for future generations. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Got some questions for me?
Yeah, sure. My name is David Landes. I am a member of the board of the American Club, and so I'm very privileged to be able to stand beside you tonight, Mr. Ambassador, and have a conversation about your role and the sort of the world around us. I've had the pleasure of meeting and interviewing a number of your predecessors. I worked as a journalist here for a number of years in Sweden, and so I think to start off, your role as ambassador is one that everyone is aware of at some level, but I think there's some curiosity of sort of what is, how has the role been so far? How has it met your expectations? Did you know what you were getting yourself into?
I absolutely love, this is my dream job and dream role in so many ways, and to do it in a place like Sweden that where I've been welcomed. My family and I have been welcomed so warmly by everyone here, and frankly, it's so easy to talk to different counterparts all across society in such a way. I mean, there's a openness and candidness to the relationship, that both the bilateral relationship we have, and also to Swedish society and culture. I think generally that really just it makes it incredibly rewarding. And the other great thing about an embassy, of course, this is a microcosm of the U.S. government, and I've had a fairly non-linear career where I've worked in the private sector and the nonprofit sector and in academia and kind of all over the map in a way. It's all made sense to me, but not necessarily to everyone. I certainly didn't pursue one direct path down any way, but one of the great things about being an ambassador is I've actually somehow managed to increase the diversity and variety of things I work on, because there's almost nothing we don't touch in a given day, whether that's just all of the relationships and people work generally, but it's working on security and military cooperation, and working on economy, both very established companies and helping them work through workforce challenges and foreign direct investment in the United States, but also startup companies and the innovation engine, and how to help them succeed and how to help that carry out what they come up with for green technology, and let's get that out across the across all the other industries. How do we learn from that in the United States so that we can import all the kind of the best ideas and figure out ways to collaborate together? These are all things I get to work on every day: human rights, diversity, and inclusion. It's really just incredibly wonderful to be able to touch on so many important issues. There has definitely never been a boring minute, much less a boring day in this job.
Well, good. So there's no shortage of things to get involved with, it sounds like. So you mentioned how you had come to Sweden 3 decades ago. You've now arrived again. It's been a couple of months, maybe now.
Yep.
Just what are your impressions of Stockholm and Sweden so far? What have you seen? What's been an impression?
I think I said a little bit of this before, but it's the warmth of the people, the life on the streets. It's we have the endless procession of people and their dogs and their friends and all that. Down the I've got a beautiful home on the Brunsviken, and just I love the life and livelihood of it all. I love the spirit that everybody brings to the U.S. relationship. Everybody seems to, just the affection between U.S. and Sweden is really, really high. Everybody loves America, and most things about American culture doesn't mean they never ask me any hardball questions, or but for the most part, it's just such a tight relationship, and such an easy one to then communicate about all the friction points that we need to communicate to do our jobs as diplomats, which is really nice.
So as we said, our members were able to submit a number of questions, and so I will do my best to channel those questions. And thank you to those who did submit questions, that we can have a really free-ranging discussion. One question, and actually this comes from our friend Beth here. We'll start off. You've been, for someone who's been here for a fairly short amount of time, you've definitely had a lot of airtime on the media and in the newspapers. And Beth was curious about kind of the preparations that you go through. How do you get ready for interviews with the Swedish media, and sort of some of the behind-the-scenes work that goes into that? Because from our point of view, it looks like you got your stuff, but I suspect there may be more to it.
There is. I mean, I've got a whole team of people who help me think about the best way to message various things as priorities change, as we hear different messages from Washington, as we think about what's been an effective way of communicating, a particular security goal, or particular economic goal, or as I learn something from a meeting that I have, and I really want to bring that into it. So we're constantly kind of revising some of those things together. But honestly, beyond that, it's a lot of preparation for media. I've done a lot of writing and larger public speaking events, but I've actually never been in a career where I've had media interviews before, and so it's actually, there's a lot of sweat and worry behind the scenes. That's to say, but I'm glad to know that I'm not showing it.
No, it's there's a lot of work beneath the surface and behind the scenes. That's for sure. So we touched on this earlier, and it is kind of the elephant in the room. Is the situation right now in Ukraine, and we had a question from one of our members, Bjorn Graneth, who I saw here tonight, and he really wants to know. I think you mentioned in great detail some of the things that the U.S. government is doing, the Swedish government, the embassy, to support Ukraine, and what Bjorn was wondering is what can we do as Americans, as Swedes, as concerned citizens to help support Ukraine and kind of manage the situation on a citizen level?
Well, I think there are lots of answers to that question, and lots of ways that everybody is finding to be helpful. Part of it is to talk about this with other people, figure out what their humanitarian options across the board. There's so many great charitable efforts and relief efforts. There's a lot of organizations you can volunteer with here in Sweden, I can't give a list or a plug to one, but there are many, so of course supporting the refugees that are coming into Sweden, or to the humanitarian situation of refugees flows out of Ukraine is one important way. I think speaking up for democracy and speaking up for human rights in all of our interactions. You all have important personal, business, other relationships that you have every day to really talk about human rights and talk about democracy and how fragile it can be and how we might get things back on track. How to combat disinformation that you might be hearing is a big problem. That when it comes to defending democracy generally. Listening to multiple media sources and original media sources, but also trying to spread that message of bolstering democracy, because I think we've really shown in this crisis what the power of unity is. We've reminded ourselves in an important way. We're all, the U.S. is a 245-year-old democracy, but it is, and we are the struggle to keep that, just because we've been doing it for 250 years doesn't mean it's perfect at all times. We're constantly working on it, constantly trying to get better. And I think that is a process all over the world. No country, no matter how free or prosperous it may be, can take that for granted. And in many ways, this larger threat to the European security order is an issue of democracy. It's an issue of rules-based order, of having principles that we all believe in and are worth fighting for. So I think just being advocates for that in our communities is another thing that we can all do.
No, I mean, you touched on a lot of salient points, and I think that this last part about the importance of remembering how fragile democracy is. It is only as good as those of us in the room and the efforts that we all put in. And this has certainly kind of crystallized the kind of what can happen when those principles fall apart. And the power of unity, I think, is a really powerful message to have.
How much we've accomplished there, of course we didn't manage to keep Putin from choosing to go to war, but we've done the enormous amount of unity beyond that, of everything from sanctions to humanitarian relief to much tighter coordination of so many things that we're working on across Europe and across the Atlantic is quite stunning. It should really be, I think, an important reminder on all the things that can come of making things better, reducing polarization, talking through the difficult issues and finding a way forward.
You mentioned the power of working together and these collaborative efforts, and here in Sweden, one of the major areas for that cooperation is the Arctic. And that's an area where the U.S. and Sweden have in the past also done a lot of work together, and where Russia is also an important player. And another member with us, David Seiko, wants to know a little bit about kind of how the situation in Ukraine and Russia's actions there have affected the ability for there to be cooperation on the Arctic, which have been moving along quite a bit. And it's sort of, can the Arctic Council be as an effective tool as it has been with the situation being as it is with Russia right now?
And Dave, that's an excellent question, wherever you are. That's an excellent question. That is, as you may know, in fact, not only do we have the Arctic Council, which has been an incredibly important body for making progress on research, on sustainable development, climate change, indigenous population protection, things like this, but it's also currently Russia's it's halfway through its 2-year chairpersonship of the Arctic Council, which would normally mean meetings in Russia to discuss of the multilateral body to discuss this, and that's it's very hard because obviously we can't have a meeting in Russia right now, and the other 7, I believe it is, countries in the Arctic Council, universally condemn Russia's actions under the leadership of Putin what's happened in Ukraine. So it makes it very difficult. At the moment, the best answer I can give is that we've paused the cooperation until we can figure out what the best path forward is, because all all 7 of us, I'd say all 8 of us probably agree that the Arctic Council is an important thing. We were getting a lot done, and we need to get a lot done. None of these issues are going away, nor should they. All of these goals are incredibly important. So I'm continuing to have meetings about the Arctic with various Swedish counterparts. Various members of the Arctic Councils are talking, but we don't yet know exactly what the path forward will be. We are committed to figuring something out as soon as we can.
Quite a bit of uncertainty, to be sure. Shifting a little bit away from the Arctic, but still kind of touching on some of these foreign policy matters. You mentioned how Sweden did take a historic decision recently and agreed to provide arms to Ukraine. There's been a very active discussion about what the Ukraine conflict means for Swedish security policy and defense policy, and the government has now signaled they want to raise the budget. And another member here, Sean Meehan, wants to know a little bit about the prospects for a bilateral defense treaty with the United States. Should the budget grow here in Sweden and capabilities grow, is that something that is in the cards in the future, some kind of defense treaty or agreement between the United States and Sweden?
Yeah, I understand the question, John, and that's, I think right now the so-called Hultqvist doctrine, named after the defense minister, Peter Hultqvist, who's been in that role for, I think it's 8+ years now, is largely a patchwork of a whole bunch of such agreements. They're not full defense treaties, but they are various bilateral and trilateral instruments that talk about various kinds of cooperation, mostly focused on military exercises, focused on research and development, armaments, cooperation. I mean, there's a lot to them. We actually do an enormous amount of cooperation. I've already had meetings with the Army, Air Force, Navy, and Marines all in my first 2 months. And because there are so many things that we're working on together, so it is quite deep, so that cooperation continues under all of those bilateral and trilateral relationships, and of course Sweden is a NATO Enhanced Opportunities partner, which is also a very important role. And Sweden has joined us on NATO missions, has done all kinds of other, done a lot to make interoperable. There, for example, in Swedish Air Force cockpits, the English is spoken exclusively to help with the interoperability with NATO and others, because we want to make sure that if whether it's in an exercise or in some other format, there is that ability, and that also extends to equipment and to other things on many levels. So there's a lot of cooperation there already. Of course, whether a security guarantee of the type available under NATO's Article 5 happens is ultimately Sweden's sovereign choice. I mean, Sweden has decided so far to remain militarily non-aligned, a long history of that stance, and it will ultimately be the Swedish people's decision whether to continue military non-alignment or seek a further security guarantee like Article 5. Certainly, I know the NATO Secretary General has been very clear that the door is wide open, and they would be welcomed if they were to do that. But that I know that debate is very much happening, probably in all of your homes and businesses and everything every day right now, as it is in Finland as well. But it is something we have to allow to play out, and we can support in any way that we're able.
Sure. I understand. On the subject of NATO, and this is a question from fellow board member Alex Lange, who's here tonight as well. I referenced your recent op-ed in Dagens Nyheter about the fact that both Finland and Sweden are part of this enhanced opportunity partners relationship, but to put it sort of in a very pointed question, I don't think this makes you sweat. What would a U.S. response look like if there were a military attack on Sweden or Finland? These countries, which are clearly have a very friendly and deep relationship with the United States and NATO, but as you pointed out, are not a part of the Article 5 guarantee. What would have happened? What would the U.S. do?
And I totally understand the question. I understand, why people are trying to process this, particularly as they think through things like whether, the so-called NATO question should happen, because they want to understand that more generally. But the reality is that it's also a hypothetical question. We don't know the form of threat that might there. The Prime Minister and multiple other folks from the military, from the government, have all said they don't see any current threat. So it's hard to know what exactly is the nature of that threat. What is the timing? Who is or are the threatening actors? It's just too hypothetical to really say. Obviously, Ukraine is an enhanced opportunities partner as well in NATO, and people can see the very specific and long list of things that we've done on Ukraine's behalf. But that is responsive to that particular situation. And, it's very hard to just conjure up what that would look like.
I'm sure if you'd asked that question a few months ago about Ukraine, you probably would have had a hard time answering it. You see, or any U.S. government representative, it's like until you're in the situation, it's kind of hard to foresee. And but I think what it's made very clear is that there are lots of things that can be done, but there are things that aren't being done as well, which is part of what it means when you're not a member of the club. To move a little bit away to a sort of broader plane, I think in recent years, and this is another question from David Sequel, there have been in Europeans some questions raised about the reliability of the U.S. as a partner. There were signals made in the form of administration about NATO, about Europe in general, and even as we look ahead to the next elections, there are people who have, I think, supported a foreign policy that leaves some Europeans a little bit curious, to be charitable. And so, what would you say to kind of calm the nerves of any Europeans who are perhaps a bit uncertain, a bit worried about the reliability of the U.S. as a long-term partner in Europe? And then what do you do in your role as the ambassador? What does the embassy do to help demonstrate that commitment?
Well, I guess the first thing I would say is that the U.S.-European relationship and the U.S.-Swedish relationship is incredibly strong. It is incredibly strong. It has been incredibly strong for a long time. It's been, even through the last several years, the cooperation we've had around security and defense issues, the cooperation we've had around trade and economic issues, investment has been very, very strong, and I think it's frankly at the highest point I've seen in my the time that I've been fully following it as a non-backpacking adult. Right now I really think things are in a great place, and my job as ambassador is foremost to continue finding the ways, even if things are great, incrementally to improve, to strengthen, to grow those those relationships, so that they're resilient through any setbacks that anybody faces, and also so that the economic ties grow that much closer, the friendship grows that much closer, the defense interoperability and cooperation are incredibly strong, because I think that is ultimately the best thing we can do for the long-term good of the Western or the rules-based European security order. Yeah, I think benefits greatly from that, and honestly, our countries, I think, are more prosperous for it. As I said, there have been, even when there have been policy disagreements, and I understand that there have been some substantial ones around things like reproductive rights, for instance, just to name one, that was contentious over the recent years. The kind of core areas of cooperation have still managed to move forward, and it's a testament to the shared values of the two countries, and how much we're, at the end of the day, a president or one branch of government is only that it is. And the end of the day, it's the people ties that we are all building that ultimately control the destiny between two countries. So I hope that gives some comfort. I'm an optimist. I definitely think that we have something amazing here, and there's always ways to make it stronger. I'm certainly not planning to rest on my laurels for the next 3+ years, but I do think there's a lot to celebrate.
No, a very positive note. I feel very assured, for one. So, you mentioned previously the concerns about polarization, difficult debates, and I've got a question here from another member of the board, Bill Borden, who wanted to know a little bit about the prospects of that polarization diminishing in the United States. You, unlike most of us in the room, have actually spent more time in the U.S. in recent years. I've been in Sweden for 10+ years, and I see on the TV and read the newspapers. It feels like it's it's a dynamic country. Things change all the time, but it is one of the things I think that is in my mind and the mind of a lot of members. What's going on? And so to get your sort of sense, having been there up until a few months ago, how are things looking on that front? Polarization in the United States.
Yeah, and I have touched on this in a few of my answers, so some of this I'll repeat myself, but I think I can bring it together a little bit better maybe. And that is to say, first of all, as I said, we are, democracy has to constantly be done and redone and redone, and we constantly have to be reinforcing the values that brought us all to the table. And I think that's happening. I am an optimist. I do see how the current administration is doing a nice job of unifying Europe, unifying transatlantic relationships, and I have to believe that that can also be done internally within the United States if it's primarily a domestic question. It is a process. It is a big country. There are demographic forces all over the world that threaten democracy, that have trended at times towards authoritarianism. Do we know, given Putin's status as an authoritarian, do we know if that will send a signal more broadly against authoritarianism, for instance? We all followed the Hungary election, I know, yesterday, though that was a bit stacked in Orban's favor, I think. So there are, to the extent there's counter-democratic trends. Some of the things that I talked about before that we can all do in our communities. I know it sounds a little bit silly. Obviously, governments and authorities should be worrying about things like disinformation and cyber threats, but these are things that affect us all. Being able to call out social media that feeds a particular narrative that to be wrong, or that these are really important things to call out, because I think a lot of the polarization that we see currently is a product of not only sort of demographic trends and other trends out there, but a lot of it relates to media warfare, if you will, digital media's effects, technologies changes the ways it's changed society and allowed people to stay in media bubbles. And, it's a broader conversation that frankly I'm a little out of my element to be the spokesman for, but that is part of the answer for how we get away from polarization, and having people not be isolated, having people have people that they talk to who don't necessarily come from the same background or the same belief system that they do, or at least they don't know that they do, is a big part of how we push back against polarization. Like I said, I'm hoping the pushback against Putin, since he represents so many of the kinds of traits of polarization, will again remind us all how it's done. And we've certainly, it's been the U.S.'s, one of our, not just ours alone, but the strategy under the current Ukraine situation has largely been to declassify and otherwise be very upfront about what we see for disinformation and false flag campaigns in Ukraine and other things that are coming down the pike, to call out before something is done that might have caused a polarizing narrative about chemical weapon use or about something else, and to really put that out there ahead of time to say, we think this is the excuse that's going to be used, or this is the polarizing message that's about to be, dropped to support, a particular narrative. I hope that can be used, by NGOs and nonprofits across society in different ways. And how can we adapt it? Let's all be creative together to push back on that kind of polarization. I think it's a never-ending task to do this.
It is a process. Democracies evolve, society changes. I think it's been very interesting to see the way that approach has diffused, I would say, quite a bit of what could have been a lot of disinformation. It will be interesting to see how this has been a bit of a laboratory for how governments and non-government bodies can kind of use these things, and how this new digital media landscape changes things. It's true. So enough of the heavy stuff. Let's go to the fun stuff. All right. One of the hot topics of conversation right now in Swedish workplaces, or maybe Swedish Teams and Zooms meetings for those who are still working a bit hybrid, is the summer. Now, a day like today, the Swedish summer can seem very, very far away. But if you're a good Swede, of course, you've already made your plans last summer for next summer. What are you thinking about spending your first summer in Sweden as U.S. ambassador?
Well, the reality is I'll probably be mostly enjoying Stockholm with no one in it. No, I will enjoy the people who are here and really get to spend this. It's still the settling in period, as you might imagine. These kind of jobs are rather intense, and my husband still works full time and travels back to the United States on a very regular basis. So we're both going to keep kind of intense schedules over this summer in particular. So I think we'll be here enjoying having a waterfront view in Djurgården and walking our dogs and exploring the restaurants with a little bit of that we don't have to plan so far ahead on. And hopefully seeing a lot of you around on the weeks when you are in town.
And one of the other important events is, of course, Almedalen, which isn't in Stockholm, it's a very curious, amazing event for those who've been there. Held the first week of July. This kind of very unique political, festival fair, and now will be held again finally for the first time. And is that something that is on your calendar?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes, I wouldn't miss it. I wouldn't miss it for the world. It's a great way to engage on all kinds of wonderful, policy debates, but also just to meet a huge number of folks in Sweden that I haven't yet had a chance to meet. So get and do the work of the embassy as well. So I could have a good chunk
Combining
of
a little work and a little pleasure.
Exactly. And I can't wait to get to. I haven't been to Gotland yet. We've been up north to Norrbotten and Västerbotten, and I've been to Göteborg just last week, and headed to Uppsala this week. And, so I'm making my way around, but it'll be nice to get a little time by the seaside and such a historic and important part of Sweden.
Good. Well, we have, I think, reached time, and so I just want to thank you so very, very much for joining us. Thank to all of you who submitted questions, and if I'm not mistaken, there will be representatives of the embassy here to answer other kind of consular-related questions.
Yeah. If you don't mind, I'll just introduce quickly my consul, Cindy Crook, Deputy Consul, Marcy Brown, American Citizen Service Chief, Greg Elrod, and our Deputy Visas Chief, Holly Lyles. So they're all here with me as well, and doing that important work of the embassy every day and delivering on the mission. So thank you, David, for moderating.
Thank you very much.
It's really,
It's a pleasure.
It's a pleasure being here, and thank you again, Cherry, and thank you all for having me.
We're really grateful that you could be here with us tonight, and I want to thank you for accepting the honorary presidency, and also for sharing a little bit with us tonight. And Gotland's great, so we'll get a chance. So I think we should have one more round of applause. Just a few other thank yous. I want to thank the board of the club for putting this on tonight, especially Alex for spearheading the whole thing. And then I want to thank you, the members. I mean, because without you, we couldn't have such a great event tonight. So yeah, it's really great to see everybody back. So with that, we'll close the meeting. There's going to be Prosecco and snacks outside, and so I'll just say that
That's the real reason.
Yeah. We can start the meeting now.
Great. Thanks for coming.